Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
Genre blending is always an interesting thing. It's always fun to see the combination of two different styles collide and show each genre's strengths and weaknesses. So you can imagine, the combination of my two personal favorite genres, horror and action, leads to some top quality flicks. And it makes sense. Action and horror films both tend to be thrill rides for audiences, but the two genres colliding can often be a mixed bag. There are some genuinely great action horror films like Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, Aliens, and You're Next. You also have movies like Resident Evil, Underworld, Van Helsing, and Ready or Not, which often don't do either genre justice and are ultimately underwhelming films. Now, I want to say, action and horror both have similar end goals, that being to thrill their audiences. Now, they both have ways of doing this. Action is more about taking the audience for a ride, showing fast-paced, badass fights and ridiculous stunt work. Horror, however, takes its time for the most part. It uses tension to build up your adrenaline and anxiety before hitting you with a big scare. Both genres clearly have different paces for the most part, and it seems like they would counteract each other. Well, I just want to start off by saying there are action horror movies that walk a very odd line, and they're usually more like B horror films with action in them. Army of Darkness is an excellent example of this. Not scary by any means, but it's got good B-movie fun and it's a solid film overall.
Hail to the king, baby.
Upgrade isn't really all that scary either, but it definitely has body horror moments that are very reminiscent of David Cronenberg's films, and the action fits in perfectly with movies like John Wick or Atomic Blonde. Now, of course, the worst films in the action horror genre are proof that the pacing can counteract each other. Resident Evil and Underworld don't come off as terrifying films with intense action scenes. They're more like Matrix ripoffs that have horror themes. Ready or Not could have been an awesome action film with the pace of a horror film, but it ends up being your typical slasher flick. Now look at You're Next, a film that is very similar in regards to Ready or Not. It starts off as a slasher, and we see our main character struggle, but by the end of the film you're basically watching First Blood. Erin isn't just another final girl, she feels like an action heroine by the end, whereas Samara Weaver didn't really feel like that in Ready or Not. The same can be said for Aliens. It could have been another action movie with horror themes, but instead it feels like a nightmare. We see our heroes battling an enemy they can't possibly comprehend. The movie is all about them fighting for survival. And that right there should be the one thing that should be the driving force behind any action horror film. Survival. Most action movies have goals like save the president or get the girl, save the world, or something along those lines. What makes the best action horror movies stand out is that the common goal is survival and nothing else. The sheer idea that they probably won't make it out is much scarier than seeing Mia Jovovich take on millions of zombies for the sixth time, or Hugh Jackman fighting famous movie monsters. Movies like Predator, Terminator, and even The Raid are pure action, but they can easily qualify for action horror just as much. Because at the end of the day, those movies are all about our hero's survival and nothing else. But if there is one film that I think perfectly mixes action and horror together, it would have to be the 2016 Korean film, Train to Busan. This film, to me, is a better version of Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead. I love Snyder's remake, but I think this film outshines it for a large number of reasons. The cinematography isn't as shaky, which was only slightly a problem in Dawn. The zombies in this film are much scarier in my eyes. The zombies themselves aren't all that scary as a monster to some degree, but the zombies in Train to Busan scare the hell out of me, especially at the Daejeon station scene. But the action itself is just as great. The characters actually need to adapt to the undead, and they can't just go in guns blazing. They have to improvise like they're Frank West from Dead Rising.
I've covered wars, you know.
But for me, the most important thing this film has, that I think any movie needs, is heart. Snyder's Dawn of the Dead ends with them escaping the undead, but with a more pessimistic outlook on the situation. The post-credit scene really doesn't help, showing that the chances of survival for our heroes is very unlikely. But with Train to Busan, the relationships between many of these characters really shines the most. Sang-hwa and Seung-kyung being separated, Seok-woo being separated from his daughter. We see the dread these characters have when they're apart, and when they get any sort of chance to be together again, we see how much they care for one another. The odds may seem impossible, but that's not going to stop them from trying to get by this threat. We're scared for them, and we want to see them overcome these odds and survive. And that ending, God, I love it. Whereas most horror films end on such a downer, Train to Busan ends on a sense of hope. When even at their absolute worst, these characters will be okay. This movie scared me, it exhilarated me, and it brought me to tears. Not every movie needs to have hope or heart. Sometimes we need films to have a pessimistic outlook. But I think Train to Busan works so well because it gives us that hope. It scares the absolute hell out of you, and it gives you amazing action, but it also breaks your heart. And most importantly, it lets you know that everything will be okay. Now, is Train to Busan the absolute best horror action movie I've ever seen? Probably not. I do enjoy Aliens and some other action horror films just a bit more. But I think the way Train to Busan mixes its action scenes with its scarier moments makes it stand out amongst the crowd. And I think the way it manages to have heartbreaking moments on top of that helps elevate it. I highly recommend you watch this movie. This film deserves a much larger audience than it already has.
간다.
Thank you for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And be ready for more videos in the near future.